In this lesson, we'll learn what type-based design is and how a graphic designer uses it to communicate to a target audience. Alright, so we've just wrapped up learning about image-based design. Now, when I say the terms type-based design, this is really very similar to me saying the words image-based design. If you recall, an image-based design is one where the image carries the weight of the communication. The message is conveyed mostly through the image. So in a type-based design, this is flipped. It's exactly the opposite. So in a type-based design, the text or the type is the main carrier of the message in the piece. So I think we're all familiar with how effective type can be to communicate a message just because it's the written word. We all know that this text on my screen right now says type-based design. So now when it comes to using type as part of a design piece, graphic designers tend to look at text and type a bit differently than the ordinary person. Now you may oftentimes hear a graphic designer referred to as a font snob. That's because they are very, very sensitive not only to what the type says and the message it's conveying, but what the type looks like and the message that conveys as well. Now, really quickly, before we move on, I don't want this to become sort of an anatomy of type of a lesson here, because we have other courses in our library that do that. So I'm just going to take a look here at this type on my screen really quickly here. Now, this is a fairly classic typeface. This is Adobe Garamond, and there are certain qualities about this type that as a designer I'm sensitive to. The first thing I notice here is that it is a serif typeface, meaning we have these little bitty pieces that come off, these ornaments or these decorative pieces that come off certain areas of the letter forms. Now, I also like this typeface, or I'm quite familiar with this typeface, again, because it's sort of a classic typeface. Now, not all serif typefaces look the same. Let me just go ahead and paste in here another typeface. There we go. This is actually Times New Roman, one that if you're not a graphic designer, you're probably quite familiar with. It comes with most word processing programs. So very similar typeface in the fact that they're both serif typefaces, but there are very, very subtle differences between these two fonts. You can see here one of those differences is that the serifs that I just pointed out up here in Adobe Garamond, they're a little bit chunkier, a little bit fatter. Down here in Times New Roman, they're a little bit more fragile. There's also a difference in X height between these two typefaces. You can see the height of these lowercase letters, where they reach to here in relation to the uppercase letters, is taller than the X height of Adobe Garamond. So these are things that a graphic designer is sensitive to when choosing a typeface. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete this here and zoom back out for us so we can move on. Now, what I find to be helpful in looking at letter forms and beginning to see the shapes of the letter forms and not just what they say is just taking one or two letters and breaking them down and sort of examining them. So in this example right here, I've got just a white letter B on a black background, but this is actually a rectangle. I can come over here and I can stretch this around. Maybe I shorten that rectangle to right here so that half that B is gone. And now I can kind of see really what the form of this portion of the B looks like. So you can see here kind of what that looks like against that black background. Now, what this allows me to do is not only examine the forms of the letter, but also the negative space that surrounds that letter as well. And that's every bit as important as understanding the forms of the letters that you're using in your projects. So in this case, you can see here that we've kind of got this nice chunked out area right around in here. Now, if we were to take that rectangle and move it in the opposite direction here, something like that, you begin to see we have sort of these two large counter areas, these two large free-hanging circular forms. So we also have, again, the bodies of the B, or the curvature of the B, that surrounds those two forms. So I think that being able to look at both the positive and negative space that surrounds a letter form is, again, critical in being able to begin making decisions based on what a typeface looks like. So with that said, let me undo that here, and I'm going to go ahead and back up. Now, designers don't just work with type when it comes to, say, a logo or even a title like this one here. Now, there were decisions made on my part when it came to choosing exactly what letter forms that I was going to use for this title, as well as how I was going to treat those letter forms. There was decisions made on my part as the designer as to what this would look like, the steps that led up to it looking like it does right now. But again, this is a title or a logo even, and the letter forms are very large, so we can see the positive and negative space very clearly. But another thing that designers work with quite frequently is larger bodies of type. Now, when it comes to larger bodies of type, as in this one here, you can see here that there was a lot of decisions made on my part as to how to treat this type in terms of the layout of these two pages here, as well as this chapter page. So again, looking here, just zooming in on this, decisions were made as far as not only what typefaces to use, but how much space to put between each of these lines of type, how much space to surround the type with on the page, assuming that the center of the book runs right through the middle of this page, shifting the type to this left-hand side on this side and right-hand side over here, treating this header up here in a different fashion. All these are decisions that I've made to basically communicate a message to the viewers of this text. If the chapter header is important, then maybe it needs to be bold or in even a different typeface. Or in this case, you can see I've even changed the color of the number of the chapter. Really, what I like to think is that type boils down to relationships, and whether it's the relationship of one letter form to another, one word to another word, one sentence to another sentence, or even a paragraph or block of copy to another block of copy. There are relationships that happen on a printed page or in whatever type of design project you're working on. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move on here to the next page. And let's just say that this is a logo for a company called Mayhem Scooters. Now, let's say Mayhem Scooters really wants to start to capture sort of that Harley-Davidson biker type of a market. Now, the logo that we're looking at right now, just in terms of the way these letter forms look, do you think that this is something that would be appealing to that audience? I hope you're thinking no, because I intentionally did this to not be appealing to that market. This typeface and these letter forms are much more playful than what I would expect a logo that appeals to that audience to be. So again, paying attention to the way these letter forms look and even the relationships between them. There's problems even with that. There's a giant gap here between the A and the Y, and everything is just sort of the same size and stacked on top of one another. So let me go ahead and show you a much more effective logo for a company called Mayhem Scooters that wants to market their product to that type of an audience. So I'll go ahead and switch over to here. Now, this is again a much more effective logo. But why do you think that is? I mean, it says the exact same thing as the previous page. They both say Mayhem Scooters. Well, it's in the way that the type looks. This type right here is something that would be more appealing to the audience that it's intended for than that type that we previously looked at. So designers are extremely concerned with not just what the type says, but how it looks as well. Now, obviously, as designers, we have projects that really kind of are more involved and do not allow us to just do strictly an image-based design or even a type-based design. So oftentimes we have to mix the two design elements, whether it be images of some sort or whether it be type. So let me go ahead and show you a couple examples here. This is really a type-based design that is becoming an image here. Now, this is an album cover for a band called The Splines, and if you are a member of, or well, actually a part of our 3D audience, then you're quite familiar with what a spline is in popular 3D applications. And you can see here that by bringing almost these wire-like structures into this logo form that almost looks like pipes. We have created almost an image out of this type. It feels like these lines flow through the logo and as well as through the album cover. So type can really become image. Now, couple more examples here for you. If we look here, again looking at this t-shirt design. Now we talked about this being an image-based design, but it does have type with it. Now what happens in the real world when you begin to mix the two elements is you need to be aware of how the type looks when it's partnered with the image. Now again, the concept for this one is that I bleed pixels, and you can see here this heart has sort of this blood, this pixel shaped blood that's surrounding it here. Well, if we look over here at the type, it also supports that concept. You can see here that the type is in the word pixels is made up of pixels, and if we even zoom in on the type for I bleed, you can see that that is very blocky and pixel-like as well. So the type needs to not fight the image, but rather contribute to it. So let me just zoom out and show you one last example here. Again, another example that we looked at as an image-based design, but there's lots of type on this magazine cover. Well, there was decisions made as far as this type goes, as well as the rest of these elements on this cover to support the image. Both the type of fonts that were used, the type of letter forms, as well as their placement, their color, and even the way they interact with the image itself. You can see here that the model in this image is almost breaking through the type behind her that says modern pinup, as well as sort of these stripes underneath that. So your type needs to really complement the concept for your design and not fight against it when you're mixing both images and type. Now, just a final thought to leave you with on type. It's going to take a lot of practice for you in beginning to look at type with a critical eye. Once you begin to do this, I think what you'll find as a graphic designer is you'll really begin to develop a love affair with type. You'll start to see it and be aware of it everywhere around you, and you'll develop a critical eye. Now, one thing you'll notice is that really good type is almost invisible. It just seems to fit. We don't notice good type as much unless we're really looking for it. Now, bad type, on the other hand, stands out and is extremely noticeable. So let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson. At this point, I want to do a quick exercise with you that is really a type-based design. So we'll get started with that in the next lesson.